Dan Andrews is playing with fire, all right? He's not a foreign diplomat. He is not geopolitically minded. He has no international business experience. And Dan Andrews has no business trying to play Mr. Big Man on the world stage, rubbing shoulders with senior officials from the Chinese Communist Party. Can we trust Daniel Andrews to tell us the truth about his real intentions about this trip to China? Now, I certainly wouldn't think so. Now, according to Dan, he is in China in order to discuss Victorian jobs, exports, and bringing over foreign students from China to our universities. Now, that all sounds very well and good, doesn't it, ladies and gentlemen? And it all sounds very innocent. It all sounds like the Premier, Daniel Andrews, is seeking measures to bolster the Victorian economy amidst, of course, growing tensions between Australia and China. But I wouldn't trust this man as far as I could throw him. And I have to think that Dan most definitely has a very, very ulterior plan, a very ulterior plan indeed. And I'll just tell you exactly what I suspect the Premier of Victoria is doing. Now, what he's doing, in my very, very strong opinion, is simply picking up the pieces from where he left off in 2019 when Dan Andrews signed the Belt and Road Initiative and connected the Victoria State government effectively to the central government of China. This was a deal that I protested at the time. I felt that Dan Andrews was severely putting our national security at risk. So the whole objective of that deal at the time was effectively to bring billions of dollars of Chinese state-backed commercial lending into Victoria for the purpose of developing infrastructure. So we look at the state of play here in Victoria right now, and what we see, of course, is a greatly mismanaged Victorian state economy. We see a state debt at $100 billion, right? That's projected to hit nearly $170 billion by 2026. And we know without any doubt that we're on track to exceed our budget by more than $10 billion. So we're set for a deficit in our budget of more than $10 billion. And with inflation and cost of living and everything that goes along with it, you could definitely draw the conclusion that Victoria is in a world of economic pain. So what is Dan doing in China? I say that Dan Andrews is effectively seeking to bail out the Victorian economy via way of seeking billions of dollars of financing via Chinese state-backed commercial lending institutions. He may not be engaging in such discussions in this particular first trip, but there's no saying he won't engage in discussions like this in his next trip. Generally, when putting large deals together like this, especially with China, the deals can be somewhat relational. That's how Chinese work in terms of business and government. It can be quite relational. So Dan Andrews will probably make attempts to cozy up to the right people whilst he is over there. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Premier of Victoria travels back to China later this year to fulfill the other parts of his objectives. So this is all pretty concerning, ladies and gentlemen, because let's just say that Dan Andrews ends up being successful in attaining Chinese state financing, and he's able to effectively bail out the Victorian economy and invest in his many visions for infrastructure development in Victoria, which is in the hundreds of billions of dollars. Keep in mind the suburban rail loop itself is estimated to cost a total of $125 billion, and that's just one project. The problem that we'll be facing in Victoria is that Daniel Andrews and the Labor government, they have no vision for the future. They have no plan for economic growth, no plan for jobs, no plan to reduce the cost of living, no plan to reduce energy costs, taxation, or the cost of doing business. So what could possibly go wrong, ladies and gentlemen, should Dan Andrews effectively be able to take out a multi-billion-dollar line of credit from Chinese state-backed institutions, and Victoria is in a position whereby we simply don't have the means to service the loan. Well, what will happen is the same event in any loan that can't be serviced, which is your security will be seized. That's right. So the question is, if Dan goes down this path, what security will he offer up to effectively the Chinese government? Will it be, will he seek to offer up maybe the Department of Housing? Maybe Vic Roads? Actually, hold on. No, Vic Roads has already been sold. Scrap that one. Maybe he'll offer up Crown Land. Maybe a national park will be the collateral. Maybe an energy grid. Maybe Victoria Police. Maybe he'll seek to effectively put Victoria Police up as security should Victoria default on its potential loan to China. Whatever it is, ladies and gentlemen, Dan Andrews is playing with fire. All right. He's not a foreign diplomat. He is not geopolitically minded. He has no international business experience. And Dan Andrews has no business trying to play Mr. Big Man on the world stage, rubbing shoulders with senior officials from the Chinese Communist Party. He's putting the entire country at risk. Dan Andrews is a national security menace. He needs to stay in Victoria and look after the basics, our hospitals, our roads, our schools, etc. But actually, I wouldn't trust him to do any of that. And the Belt and Road Initiative, by the way, and other types of commercial lending arrangements between the Chinese government and foreign governments have left an absolute trail of destruction all over the world, everywhere it's been. So there's no reason to believe that the fate of Victoria, should Victoria enter into such a financial contract, would be any different. Chinese Communist Party and the Belt and Road Initiative and these commercial lending agreements have created many victims. Countries have ended up very, very much in a bad position, including but not limited to Ecuador, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Moldova, many countries in Africa, including but not limited to the small nation of Djibouti, which defaulted so badly on their finance that the government was effectively backed into a corner and forced to allow the Chinese government to set up a Chinese military base on their own sovereign land. Now, you would think that the leader of the opposition here in Victoria, John Pesutto, would be jumping up and down in fits of rage. You think that he would be slamming his fist against his desk, outraged that a man who is supposed to be the Premier of Victoria is indeed putting our nation's national security at risk. But John Pesutto seems to be missing in action. So we have to presume that by his silence, or mostly silence, that he probably thinks it's okay. Because at the end of the day, John has more important matters to deal with, that's right, such as conducting surveillance operations over the social media habits of Moira Deeming. So considering that there is no opposition in Victoria, ladies and gentlemen, that makes it my responsibility and your responsibility to call out treachery where we see it. And it can be without any question that Dan Andrews for far too long has stepped out of his shoes. He has spent countless millions of Victorian taxpayer dollars on his lavish trips to China. And let me tell you something, he's not traveling in economy. No, he's going with all the bells and whistles. And he is attempting to operate under the cloak of silence and secrecy in order to bring about his vision for Victoria, which will lead to complete economic demise and, I dare say, the overtaking of our sovereign assets to a hostile foreign government. I mean, Dan Andrews, the bloke's never picked up a hammer in his life. He's never had a real job. He doesn't understand business. He's living in fantasy land. And unfortunately, he, happens to be the Victorian Premier. So tell your friends, tell your family, everybody should be outraged, but of course not many people are. The real opposition in this country is the Freedom Party of Victoria. So sign up, get on board. When we shoot, we aim between the eyes. That's right. So head on over to www.freedomparty.net.au. Join the fight. Let's oppose Dan Andrews. We don't want the Chinese Communist Party on our doorstep. All right. We have a difficult time as it is dealing with the tyranny of the Victorian government. We don't need to double down with the tyranny of the Chinese government. But of course, Daniel Andrews would very much like that. So we must say no. We must do everything we can. I'd tell you to go and email your local MP, but chances are they won't respond to you. So that's why don't even waste your time. Sign up to freedomparty.net.au. The party is getting back into action. All right, we're organising community action groups, and we're going to go after these people. And at the end of the day, if you're going to get taken out, you'd rather get taken out going out swinging than begging on your knees. Does that make sense? So I say embrace the fight, because when you embrace the fight, it also means that you are very much living, and that's what we want to do. We want to live. So that's my thoughts on that, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for watching. To make sure you never miss an episode, sign up at mcjreport.com. Catch you on the next one.